Tariffs seem to be the talk of the town right now. I've been fielding some questions about how this could impact importing Velomobiles to the US, so in this video I'm going to do my best to provide some information to answer those questions. First, what are tariffs? Tariffs are a tax placed on goods imported into a country. The purpose is first to protect companies from manufacturing competition in foreign countries for things like cars, clothing, and even things like produce and beverages. It's normally a percentage of the purchase price. For instance, right now Velomobiles are imported to the US in a category with special types of tricycles and are subject to 3.7% tax. For an item like a Velomobile which isn't manufactured in the US, tariffs don't really do anything to protect US production because there aren't any produced here. Instead, those tariffs are a source of revenue for the US government. In addition to paying import tax, of course, you also pay your local state tax so that both the state and the government profit off your purchase. So, who pays tariffs? That would be the importer, in this case me at Northland Velo. Because my profit margin isn't especially large, those import costs are billed to the client. This is pretty common for businesses because after all, we have costs we need to cover besides just the time we invest making the sale. In the case of tariffs, especially the 10 to 25% or more tariffs being proposed, businesses will end up raising prices to compensate for the profit loss. In the case of Northland Velo, I would have to increase prices by whatever percent tariff is imposed on EU goods. Are tariffs all bad? Not necessarily. In the case of businesses that are having to compete with countries where labor costs are a fraction of those in the US, it can help protect those businesses from competition by increasing the price for imported goods. However, the challenge is that production costs in the US tend to be a lot higher than in countries like China, India, even Romania, South America. That means goods manufactured in the US will cost the consumer more than imported goods. On the one hand, tariffs mean more manufacturing jobs for US workers, but on the other, it means the price of goods will be higher because of higher manufacturing costs here. Tariffs reducing competition can also lead to a lack of competition for products in the market, allowing US businesses to charge higher prices and increase their profits. That means there has to be a careful balance with tariffs between protecting American businesses and jobs and still providing a reasonable level of competition to ensure consumers can find affordable products. So do tariffs always work? Unfortunately, no. Most economists agree that tariffs generally raise prices for consumers and also lead to retaliation from the countries tariffs are imposed upon. For instance, when the current administration announced 25% tariffs on all goods from Canada, Canada responded by announcing 25% tariffs on the US. Manufacturing in both countries relies on products from the other, especially for things like cars, which would then drive up the price of cars for consumers. During the previous Trump administration, China responded to the tariffs levied on their exports by adding tariffs to US exports such as soybeans and pork. To offset the income farmers lost due to the tariffs and lost sales to China, the government had to subsidize farmers. The 2018 tariffs on imported steel also didn't lead to a notable increase in jobs at US steel plants. The other issue is that there's a limit to manufacturing capacity. Setting up a factory is no small task and comes with considerable expense. You've also got to have sufficiently trained workforce to fill all those factory jobs. At present, the U.S. unemployment rate is quite low at just a bit above 4%, nearly 1.5% below the average U.S. unemployment rate. That means there are less skilled workers looking for a job, which in turn limits the number of factories that can be established to meet consumer demand. There's one other factor to consider, and that's the income manufacturing brings to poorer countries. In countries like Mexico, China, India, and even Romania, the manufacturing jobs, even with the low salaries they offer, provide income security in areas with very few opportunities. These jobs mean disadvantaged populations have income to buy food, put a roof over their heads, feed their family, and it reduces the chances they turn to crime or look to immigrate to provide for themselves and their families. That in turn contributes to a more stable global environment. So what about producing Velomobiles in the US? In theory, this is a possibility. The question is whether or not it's the most cost-effective option. I visited Velomobile World, the largest producers of Velomobiles in the world, a couple times now. It's an incredibly high-tech factory in the middle of nowhere in farm fields in a fairly poor and remote area of Romania. There's curing ovens, paint booths, sanding stations, metal lathes. All of these items are expensive to procure and necessary for production. Besides the technology, there's also the manpower and the knowledge. A Velomobile is generally a 4 to 6 week build process from composite layup to curing, body fillers, sanding, painting, and assembly. The cost of labor in the US is several times higher than that of Romania. At the moment, import costs around $1,000 between shipping and duty. That's the cost of one worker working maybe 32 hours in a week in the US. When comparing the labor costs between the current factory workers and US workers, it would be a challenge to produce Velomobile here for the same cost as they're produced in Europe and imported to the US. In short, tariffs have a limit to how effective they can be. A blanket tariff like the one proposed on EU goods would mean price increase, especially for Velomobile imports, but not so much that it would start to make financial sense to build them here. Instead, it would just further limit the number of Velomobiles sold due to the increased cost. While tariffs can protect U.S. companies from overseas competition, it doesn't always lead to more jobs for U.S. workers, and often those tariffs are met with tariffs from the other country on U.S. exports. While tariffs generate tax dollars for the U.S. government, those costs normally are passed on to the consumer in the form of price hikes, as would be the case for Velomobiles, essentially meaning you're paying more tax on your purchase. If you'd like to learn more about tariffs, their history, effectiveness, and generally check the info I've shared here, check the link below to my blog for a list of references. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're in the US, take some time to contact your congresspeople and let them know how the proposed tariffs could impact your life and also that of your favorite Velomobile dealer.